Hello and welcome to the Fintech Finance Verbs Arena. I'm your host, Doug McKenzie, and on today's session, we're going to be looking at how we can make hybrid happen and financial services sector better in the future. We're also going to be looking at the future of wellness and well-being in the hybrid workplace, and it's going to be so important, and it's actually a topic really close to my heart as well, because as we enter into this new normal, I'm really excited to hear from our three panelists here today who are right at the heart of that topic. And joining me today, I have Krista Griggs from Fujitsu. Krista, how are you doing?
Excellent, thank you.
Well, Krista, thank you for joining us here today. Can you give our audience a bit of background to yourself and your role at Fujitsu, please?
Yeah, of course. So I have a technical background. I started as a software developer, became a designer, and now as an architect, I've become the head of our financial services and insurance sector within Fujitsu. So this is a very big part of what we do with our customers and very important trends that we're seeing in the sector.
That's absolutely brilliant. And as you said, that is really, it's going to be such an important kind of spearhead to changing the way that we really operate in the workplace going forward. And also joining us today is Joanna Molik from Microsoft. Joanna, how are you doing here today?
I'm all right. Well, warm welcome from Poland, where I am doing my very interesting work as an industry digital strategist at Microsoft, where I'm working with our most strategic customers, solving together the challenges for today and for the future. So I'm really pleased to be here.
Well, thank you so much for joining. I'm so excited to hear that kind of tech side and how that's also going to play an exponential role going forward. Thank you so much for joining. And also we have Anjali, Raina from HBS, the Harvard Business School. Anjali, how are you doing here today?
It's fabulous to be with all of you and to actually see how virtual spaces are bringing people from across the world together. So it's really my pleasure to be here with you.
Thank you so much. And yeah, it really does typify what we're going to be talking about. The fact that we're doing this podcast, we've got people from around the world all coming together to talk about how we can make workplaces better. So I guess with question one, if I could come to Krista and ask, really, will financial services organizations actually move to a hybrid workplace permanently? Is that something you can foresee?
Yeah, absolutely. And we're already seeing that banks like HSBC and NatWest have already declared that that's a permanent change that they're making. And equally, we saw Goldman Sachs who said they wanted everyone to come back to the office. There was a real backlash to that. So absolutely, we're already there.
Yeah, I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head there. It seems to be everyone's kind of trepidatiously moving forward, and the ones that kind of maybe just immediately jump back in are being slightly burnt there. It's interesting to see that kind of dynamism. And also, if I could come to you, Anjali, as well, do you also think that the hybrid workplace will become permanent for a lot of financial organizations?
That's really an interesting question. And since I am from banking, before I joined Harvard Business School, I spent almost 26 years with different banks, Citigroup being one of them. I actually surveyed my past colleagues on this. Most of them are holding very big jobs across the world in different banks and in India, which is where I'm located. And the reaction was very similar to what Krista is saying, that some organizations are totally focused on bringing everybody back to work and in fact have already done it. And some are saying that it's going to be hybrid and it's going to be 3 days and so on. But some of the more thoughtful colleagues, ex-colleagues, actually pointed out that it depends on the job. And so, for example, in investment banking itself, if you have a research analyst, then maybe that person can do a hybrid job or a completely remote job. But a person who's in sales and trading or who's trading in very large amounts where you need to, milliseconds matter and where approvals matter, maybe those people need to be on site.
Yeah.
So very similar to the educational industry, where it depends on the job. You may have some industries, some financial services organizations which say that, yes, we embrace hybrid, but there are certain jobs in that hybrid organization that will be totally online.
Yeah.
And maybe all that we can say that coming out of this pandemic is that the experiment has been fantastic in showing people that hybrid that remote working can be productive, that work can be done remotely. But how do people accept that and take that forward is going to be something that we have to still work out.
Yeah. And it's I think this kind of tempered approach is so nuanced, and I love to hear it, because so many newspapers here in the UK are just one or the other, and it's very easy to just get this black and white approach, when in fact you're right. I mean, some jobs are different, and the fact that we're not even looking through it through that lens is absurd. So it's lovely to hear that. Now, can I ask Joanna, how can we transform these hybrid workplaces, if that's something that is a model that's going to continue, into an environment that supports the well-being of their employees?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and I think it's embraces what we see as a hybrid paradox, because on one side we see the demand and desire to work remotely as a way to be productive, but people are craving that in-person connection for the ability to actually form as teams and be more productive together. So what we call it in the latest research that Microsoft has published, the Work Trade Index, that hybrid paradox is we want flexibility, but we crave the human connection. And I think having that applied programmatically across your organization, taking the learnings of the past months and applying to what fits best the diverse employee groups within financial institutions, I think it's the first step to know your employees and know their needs and provide them with flexible hybrid solutions that are fit for different types of work, different types of jobs we are doing. Because one observations we are seeing that there is no one size fit all approach, and we know that some employees prefer to work from home and be more productive at home, while others cannot wait to come back to the office, and that's where the hybrid paradox come in place. Is giving everybody the same experience, no matter where they are. I see it more with the rise of more in-person meetings, how making sure that everybody is included, no matter where they joined digitally or they're physically present in the office. It's the number one step to maintain and manage that level of connection that is, to me, a number one element for well-being at work. So that hybrid paradox and the ability to fit in different expectations into one hybrid experience, I think it's the key element to tackle.
Yeah. And it's important to have that in the kind of thought process when tackling this is that well-being element, because it's all well and good just thinking, oh yeah, we'll implement it, but then actually how do you then action that and make sure that everyone, as you said, Joanna, is being included and being taken care of, and you're not just implementing it for the sake of implementation. That is so critical. And before we move on to the next question, Krista, I also want to get your perspective, hearing Fujitsu's point of view and how you can transform these hybrid workplaces into a supporting and caring environment for employees.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things we've seen as well is that it's difficult, or with remote working, especially during lockdown and when everyone is remote, it's really difficult to spot when people are struggling. And for some people, actually, it's created a really difficult well-being situation. And as managers, we have to be more cognizant. As leaders, we have to understand what the personal circumstances, so not just a job situation and circumstances, but also a person's personal circumstances and what's the right thing for them. How can we make sure that stay connected, that they're not being burnt out? How can we help them to make the most of our people by providing them the right tools to be as effective as they can be within the context of their own personal life?
Yeah, and I think that's something we should continue to focus on within this conversation is the fact that we're looking at workplaces, but we're also looking almost into the private life of individuals and employees. There's that what was called a work-life balance before, which maybe involved getting a beer at 4 p.m. to now actually providing care for people who are working from home and facing very different interactions on a daily basis. Now, with that, please, Anjali.
Yeah. Just to add to what has been said by Krista and Joanna, the very fact that we're talking about wellness and well-being of employees is maybe a wonderful fallout of this whole process, because I don't think employers have ever really cared that much. They've looked at physical well-being, and they've had cafeterias with nutritious food, and they've had gymnasiums, and they've paid for yearly checkups and so on, but it's always been on the physical dimension. But this focus on mental health, mental well-being, emotional well-being, even the focus on inclusivity and on diversity, is the heightened focus is probably more widespread than it was earlier. And so that's a good indication. One of the reasons why there is so much burnout and anxiety and so many issues is because there is a pandemic. So it's not like the earlier working from home or remote working where you could go to a coffee shop and work. So these are unusual circumstances. However, hopefully in a year or two, this pandemic will reduce and become endemic and so on and so forth, and people will be able to meet others. So there may not be that much anxiety and that much stress. But what has happened is it's a bit like automating a bad process. What we've really done is we've just taken the existing work environment and we've transferred it to remote. And we haven't really built the capabilities on how to deal with that or how to design that. And so that may be one of the reasons for the burnout and the mental anxiety and so on, including the issues around the pandemic itself and the fact that everybody is closeted together. So really the point that Microsoft had raised earlier when I had spoken to some people is that one can actually design the workplace, the remote workplace, in a better way. And maybe that's what we should really be talking about. It's not just about automating a bad process or not just about transferring the workspace into a remote environment, but how do we think about workplace design? Earlier it used to be all office design and designed around work, but should we be focusing on humans? And a very small example, when many years ago, when I used to work for Citibank, we introduced ATMs. And, an ATM was replacing a human teller, but it was in the same place as the human teller. And so the customer would go all the way inside the bank and go right to the back and then draw their cash. And it was problematic. And then customers told us that, I just want to park my car and zip in and zip out and not get a parking ticket and so on. And so the location of the ATMs was designed so that a customer could just walk in and walk out. And even if the customer came after office hours, they could access the ATM and there didn't need to be anybody handling. Then after some time, they came into walls so that you didn't even need a security guard and so on. And so that was designed around the customer. It was not designed around the security systems of the bank where the cash had to be kept safe inside a teller's cubicle. And so maybe we need to think about work today in financial services in the same way. We need to design it around the humans who are doing the work, rather than around the pressures of the financial services organization. So with apologies for that interjection.
It's trying to fit a square peg into a round hole effectively. We're applying the same learnings from office space where you have to look at how you can work around a table with 30 other people and applying that into a bedroom. And we need to, I was on a virtual arena earlier in the week with an financial institution, and they were asking to, I think the phrase they used, reevaluate everything. Just like your instance there with the ATM, taking it from the back house and putting it right even on outside, which almost seems absurd when you don't think of it in the first instance. And as soon as you reevaluate everything and have that humanist approach, I think we're going to see some incredible kind of innovations coming out from that. Now, if I could stick with you, Anjali, then, how would leaders, organizations build solutions that encourage wellness and well-being? It's very well to kind of have that humanist underlying approach, but how can we go about and action it and have that top-down approach, really?
So, since I work for Harvard Business School, I'm going to refer to some research that was done by Harvard a long time ago, which is actually done before the pandemic. And it's called the Flourishing Index. And if we have a measure of the Flourishing Index, if we can use that Flourishing Index to measure how people are, then maybe we can design around that. And the Flourishing Index basically says that people flourish when you have mental, emotional, psychological, intellectual health. So it has a number of parameters. It's freely available. It's, this is not secret research or anything like that. But if we can use that Flourishing Index to actually design work and and just like we look at the financial returns from an organization, we look at the Employee Flourishing Index as a way to see whether the employees are flourishing, then that can be an outcome measure, which we work backwards from. So obviously, if we think that, just like if we think physical health is important, we do sorts of things, like health checkups, etc. If we think that mental health is important, then it's not just about getting into a person's private life and checking on them. It's about how do leaders lead empathetically? How do they build those skills in themselves so that they can hear what is not being said, see what is not being shown, understand what is not being articulated? That level of empathetic skill building in a leader is not something that we've really focused on earlier. Yes. And so more than anything else, of course, again, I'm from Harvard Business School and we focus on leadership, but this is really about how do we create the leaders of the future? What are the skills that are required? Apart from the technical skills, of course, you will need to know how to manage the organization and make sure that your sales and trading goes well and that there's governance and that there's security and privacy and so on. But this empathetic leadership style is probably the base around which everything else gets built. An empathetic leader will do a human-centered design.
Thank you so much for your input. We're actually going to stop there for a brief pause because this is going to turn into a two-parter. The topic is too big to discuss in one virtual arena, so we're going to end it there. Thank you to all our speakers. We will catch up with you shortly, and also to our guests and viewers. Thank you so much for watching. We will alert you when the second part is coming out. You can catch the rest of the series and more over at www.ffnews.com and of course YouTube and LinkedIn. I'll see you in the comments. So thank you very much and goodbye.